Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. As each year passes, the regulations that tillage farmers need to follow get even longer. From requirements around rotation, nitrates, stubble cultivation or pesticide application, the list is actually too long to name all of them here. Pesticides are an area where the public and the environmental lobby hone in on and call for reductions or even their total elimination. As we know, EU targets have set the direction of travel with targets of 50% reduction of pesticides and pesticide risks. The use of pesticides on farm is currently governed by the Sustainable Use Directive, and this has gone through an intensive evaluation across Europe with a view to improving the effectiveness of the rules. A couple of months ago, the EU published the next iteration of the directive with the Sustainable Use Regulation. There are a number of areas in this which need to be discussed, and I'm joined by Anne Marie Dillon from the Department of Agriculture to go through the major areas in this new regulation which will affect farmers over the next couple of years. Anne Marie, the Sustainable Use Directive has been enforced across the EU and Ireland for the past 13 years, covering all aspects of how pesticides are used. But before we get into the SUD, we might just set the scene in terms of what sort of regulations or hurdles a pesticide needs to pass through before coming onto the market.
So a pesticide active substance which is contained in a plant protection product is approved or not centrally at European level. This follows a detailed scientific assessment and a rigorous peer review process, which is managed by the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA as we know it. And following this assessment, then EFSA submit its conclusion to the Commission. And the Commission then put forward a proposal for an approval or not of that active substance, which goes for a vote at the Standing Committee, which is the 27 member states. It should note that active substances which are approved will then be subject to review periodically. And then, as I say, following the review of an active substance, the actual plant protection product containing these are subsequently authorised and registered or not nationally. And you will be aware of the list of registered plant protection products on our website.
Okay, so from my understanding of it then, if I'm right in saying this, huge amount of regulations before a product can actually go from discovery, from through research all the way through into manufacture until it gets, if you like, into the bottle, kind of ready to go out onto farm. And am I right in saying that the piece then that the Sustainable Use Directive, as we know it, that covers, I suppose, maybe the safety aspects from when it comes out of that bottle or when it leaves the factory all the way to when the farmers are going to use it?
Yes, absolutely. So you have the regulation that covers the actual placing on the market of the plant protection product. And I suppose on the other end, you then have the regulation that covers the residues and the end result. But in the middle is the actual use, and that's where the Sustainable Use Directive comes in.
Okay, so if we just go back a little second now and could just look at the Sustainable Use Directive as it is at the moment. What sort of requirements are in place for users or advisors or people who are actually interacting and applying those chemicals or recommending those pesticides and to make sure they're used correctly?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Michael, we've been working within the SUD for more than a decade now, and the goals of which has always been the actual sustainable use of pesticides. I think we're all familiar with the requirements within that directive, but maybe just to outline a couple of the aspects that come to mind. So I suppose the area of training, the requirement for advisors, distributors and professional users to have appropriate training has been implemented over the years. IPM is obviously the cornerstone of the sustainable use of pesticides, and all professional users are required to implement the principles of IPM when making decisions on plant protection. The area of application equipment, there's a requirement for sprayers to be tested and to be retested. And just to note that this retest must now be done every 3 years. Correct storage is obviously another aspect, the correct storage of pesticides on farm and at retail and wholesale level. Sensitive areas is another area within the SUD, and the protection of water is obviously an important aspect of this, and you'll be aware of the need for buffer zones where required.
So it covers a lot of areas, I suppose.
It does indeed.
Anne-Marie, really with it all. And I suppose if you're a farmer on the ground, you'd probably know only too well, or certainly advisor, you'd know only too well about all of those requirements that are there, because I think it's been implemented pretty well here. But I think within that, though, if I'm right in saying that the sustainable use directive goes all the way across Europe, and there was a review process in place over the last number of years to try and figure out, well, how effective was it, I suppose. And then the next step, I suppose, is that you have rewritten it and proposed a new one. And now we have something coming at us called a sustainable use regulation rather than a sustainable use directive. What's the difference between the two of those? I mean, what's how do they differ? Just purely in the name, I suppose, in terms of how they're going to be implemented.
Yes, so as you know, the Commission launched the Farm to Fork strategy in 2020. And as you mentioned, they also carried out a review of the directive. And as part of that, they are now putting forward a proposal for a regulation on the sustainable use, which will replace the directive, as you mentioned. And this proposal was published in June 2020. So just to answer your question on the difference between a directive and a regulation, I suppose the main difference is that a regulation is directly applicable to all member states in a harmonized manner. It must be applied directly across the EU, whereas a directive is more like a framework or a set of goals for member states to achieve, but then the individual member states come up with its own laws on how to reach these goals, which we have done as part of the directive.
So if I'm to understand you right, then the new one which is coming at us, being the sustainable use regulation, that'll be imposed into Irish law, will it? And how long will that take if that is the case?
Yeah, so the Commission published the proposal in June, and this proposal will now be considered at Council and at Parliament. This work has commenced in Council with all 27 member states and within Parliament as well. They will also consider the proposal. These negotiations will they'll definitely go on for the next 12 to 18 months and maybe beyond. It's a difficult piece of regulation. So if I was to guess, I would say it might go beyond. So I suppose it's difficult to guess at this stage when a final text might actually become law. I suppose we're very early in the process. So I wouldn't like to guess an actual timeline, but it's clear that this is a number of years away.
But to a degree, am I right in saying it's a little bit more serious in terms of its implementation being a regulation rather than a directive?
Yes, I suppose the point that it will be directly transposed, directly applicable to all member states. And that was one of the criticisms of the directive as part of the Commission's review, that there was a need for a more harmonized approach.
Okay, so as you mentioned, then the regulation is published. It's on the website. I got to look at it. It's there on one of the EU websites. If you Google it, can anybody look at that draft? Is it behind any walls or anything like that? And I can't remember exactly. You might know where exactly or what to Google to try and for farmers or industry to look at it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely publicly available, as are a lot of documents relating to the review. The Commission proposed text and all the relevant documents are available on their website. We've actually included a link on this on our own website, which is available at pcs.agriculture.gov.ie, and it's actually there on the news page on the home page. So I think, and as you mentioned, Michael, I think if you Google sustainable use regulation, you will find it also.
Okay, so like I say, I had a quick look at it, and it's a pretty lengthy document with a good bit of stuff in it, but you might maybe give us an idea or cover a few areas that you think are of particular relevance for maybe change that potentially is coming down the line as is proposed at the moment.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just mention a few aspects to note, but of course there are more within the proposal. So it's, as you say, it's definitely worth a read. I suppose the first thing to mention is that within this proposal, it includes legally binding reduction targets for all member states to be met by 2030 in line with the Farm to Fork strategy. So that's talking about a 50% reduction in the use and risk of chemical pesticides. And under the current proposal, these reductions are measured based on sales data in each member state and with particular weightings for specific pesticides based on their risk profile. And suppose it's worth mentioning also that these reduction targets are based on the baseline date of 2015 to 2017. Another aspect which I suppose is linked, is continuing on from the SUD, is the area of integrated pest management. And again, there's a strong emphasis on IPM within the proposed regulation. And under the current proposal, the pesticide user will have a legal obligation to implement IPM based on specific rules, and this will have to be documented. Professional users will be required to keep electronic records, and any interventions used, be it chemical pesticides, be it biological, be it physical, cultural, will need to be documented. And there will be crop-specific rules incorporating things like threshold levels, etc. Another aspect worth noting is the area of advice and independent advice. So the proposal currently includes a requirement for a system of independent advisors for professional users, and who must seek advice on things like IPM, risk mitigation, etc., at least once per year from these independent advisors, and these records to be maintained for 3 years. I mentioned sensitive areas under the SUD, but again, this is an area that there's a lot more detail in the regulation, and the SUR, as it currently is proposed, proposes to prohibit the use of plant protection products in sensitive areas or within 3 meters of these areas. And currently, the scope of sensitive area as defined is very broad, includes public parks, paths, gardens, recreational sport areas, human settlements, but also agricultural areas, like areas within the SPA or the SACs, the special areas of conservation. So that's quite a broad area. They're just some aspects, Michael. There are lots more, of course, but they just came to mind.
I think a lot of our listeners who are listening to that particular list of stuff are after taking a great big long gulp of breath, kind of going, holy moly, oh, there's a lot of stuff coming at us. So, but I suppose before people panic too much and maybe start banging at the radio and start hitting their device they're listening to this on, this is not a done deal. Obviously, there's a lot of negotiations to go as yet. And you're kind of in the middle of them. You're already starting into these negotiations, working through them kind of methodically. Do you sense, or do you get much of a sense from all of the other member states that are around the table that they also have concerns about some of these aspects?
Yeah, as I say, Michael, this is very much the beginning of this process, and this will go on for as I mentioned, at least 18 months. I suppose it's worth noting, just in the submissions that have been made to the Commission on their public consultation. I looked just there this morning, and then there are over 3,000 submissions have been made, and these are all available to be seen on the Commission website. But these comments give a sense of the type of issues being raised, and there's certainly concerns about the proposal relating to the sensitive areas and what that might include. There's also a concern around the impact of these proposals and the obvious need for alternatives for farmers, and that's clear. Also, the legally binding targets is something that is being raised. But as I say, it's very early days, Michael, in this process. So, there will be a lot of further discussion over the next number of months and indeed years in this, but we'll watch this.
And Anne Marie, I believe the process is, like I say, there's negotiation and as I've often heard it said, that there's a listening ear out at the moment, and there is a consultation process where people can comment, I suppose, maybe around the regulation as it is at the moment, and the EU are actively looking for that. How does the industry or farmers go about doing that?
Yeah, so the Commission have opened a public consultation. It's been open since July. Now, we have again put a link to that on the website that I mentioned earlier, PCS tillage.agriculture.gov.ie, and we have included a link, so it's very straightforward just to link in, and it outlines how you can make your submission within that. And as I said earlier, there are over 3,000 submissions, and all submissions are available publicly to see, so you can get a sense of the type of comments and submissions being made. The closing date, sorry, just to mention, Michael, the closing date for submissions of those comments is very close. It's the 19th of September, so it is important that those any comments are included before that date.
So, Anne Marie, just a final question, and as you have looked at some of the commentary there already, and I suppose from my point of view, generally, or if in an industry point of view, I suppose the NGOs or the environmental lobby, they'll be very quick, I'm sure, to put in their comments and have it in there. Did you get any sense, or much of a sense, there was many farmers or industry-led commentary in there, or maybe aligned to that? How important do you think, even from a legislator's point of view, obviously based in Ireland, that Irish farmers and Irish industry actually get something in on this and actually make a comment and try and get their views across to the EU as regards how these new regulations potentially might shape or potentially maybe damage the tillage industry as we have it today?
Yes, Michael, as I said, there's over 3,000 submissions. I haven't read them all, to be honest, but there is certainly a broad scope of stakeholders making submissions. And of course, it's open to everybody. It's public consultation, so everybody can have their say and put in their comments in that regard. So absolutely, it's essential that all stakeholders include comments within that. That the Commission will then summarise those, and they will then report back to Council and the Parliament, giving a summary of the type of concerns or the type of comments being submitted. And that will include from all stakeholders. So again, from all aspects. So
okay, yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. Look, that's certainly a job that farmers have to do, and probably have to do it relatively quickly, or people in the industry need to do it relatively quickly, because just a reminder, the closing date is the 19th, I think you're saying?
It is,
which
indeed.
is next Monday, the 19th of September. So people want to get it in before that. And I think it's a relatively simple process in terms of just logging on and putting your commentary in an open comment box. So I think it's relatively straightforward.
Yes.
Anne Marie, you're very good. Thank you very much for joining us today on the podcast. Really delighted we could kind of go through all of that, because it is a very important area for farmers and the tillage industry in Ireland. Thanks again.
No problem, Michael.
So that's it for this week, and my thanks to Anne Marie for joining me on the podcast this week. Just a couple of areas to mention before I sign off for today. In order to understand the aspects of the podcast which are most appealing and beneficial to you, I would greatly appreciate if you could take 3 to 4 minutes to complete the survey. The details of this are in the podcast notes. Also, drop into the Teagasc stand at the Ploughing Championships next week and say hello to my colleagues and I. There's certainly a lot to talk about at the moment. So finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed this podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.